Okay, I'm just here. Make sure I get that first. Well, I have 1 o'clock on my clock. On the dot. Hopefully you can hear me. This is Kirsten, and this is a webinar on grievances. And I have to say, it's a little dry of a topic, so I've tried to find ways to kind of make it more exciting. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. That was going to be my next question. So for folks who might be new to this particular webinar system, you are currently on mute. Everybody is on mute. Clicking it open. If you would like to make a comment, ask a question, interrupt me, whatever, there is a little button on the right side of your screen that kind of looks like a hand, and that's essentially the same thing as raising your hand. There's also a little question mark. You can hit that. Either way, I will see and know that I need to pause. I will try and keep my eye on my little box that shows when those are lit up, so I know I need to pause and see what folks have written. You have a chat box. It's easier to type in your question or your comment often than to try and unmute and do it over voice. But if you would prefer to do over voice, I can certainly do that. I will, again, raise your hand and I will have to manually unmute you from my end before you are able to speak to everybody. People are still popping up fast and thick right now, so I'm going to continue to just natter on for a bit while I wait for people to get here. I'm seeing lots of familiar names, so I'm hoping that means people are familiar with and comfortable with our webinar system. But again, if you have comments or questions, you can type it into the chat box that is in that panel that you have on your right side of your screen. If you want to raise your hand, there's a little thing that looks like a hand. You can hit that button, and I will try and keep my eyes on my chat box for questions and comments too. And when you do send me something, I will most likely be voicing that out loud to everybody before I answer. What you're seeing on the screen is my PowerPoint, or at least the first page of my PowerPoint. Isn't that beautiful and terribly, terribly dramatic? And maybe the topic of grievances sounds very dramatic and tragic, but it doesn't have to be. It can be. Having a process in place can be a way to make sure things don't get to this level of drama. So with that said, I'm going to proceed. Okay. So when I say grievances, what am I talking about? Well, there's a whole bunch of different things in this little box. It could be that a client or a coworker or even another agency has a concern about a particular staff person working for a program. So it could be about that one particular advocate. It could be about the program, in particular some policy or practice or decision that was made by your program. And again, that could be happening from an individual person, a client, or a staff person, or a person for another agency, or it could be from one agency to another. It can be internal. In other words, everything is handled at that program level and it's from one, from one client to advocate or from one advocate to another. It could be external, so a funder having a concern or a neighboring program or the local DHS office. It could be about service issues. What is it that you do? What is your policy? What is your practice? How did you make this decision? Why was this done? Or it could be about personnel issues, things like confidentiality or favoritism or boundary violations. And sometimes you don't really know what's in your particular chocolate there until you get a chance to dig into it and poke it and prod it. And what might have looked like simply an advocate, a minor advocate concern at once, may turn out to be a larger programmatic concern. You don't always know right up front. So I'm going to break this down. I'm going to talk about what are the rules, if you will, the laws that govern the work that we do, and there's several places that those come from. Certainly any particular agency has policies and protocols in place that guide how you're supposed to do the work. There's the Advocate Code of Ethics, and one of the reasons that we require that certified domestic abuse advocates sign that, actually at the other level too, at victim advocate level, is because we want there to be some agreement about our practice across the state, about what we consider to be good practice. So that guides the work. There is the membership service standards that we approved, the new version last spring, about a year ago. And that again is an agreement by all the different member programs of how we think services should best be provided. Funders have their requirements about how we provide services, and in order to get funding, for whether it's from your United Way or from the Crime Victim Assistance Division grants or whatever, you're essentially creating a contract between you and that funder saying, this is what we're going to do with your money, if you will give us the money. And that can include how the work is done. So whether or not confidentiality is maintained, for example, is a requirement under a number of the federal grants that everybody gets. And funders may have some specific things that they require that help guide the work. And of course, here in Iowa, we are under the state of Iowa code, and there's various other regulations, fire regulations, for example, in terms of your facility, and all of that guide our work. So, the happy side of a grievance process, happy. Having a thing that people do, a step-by-step laid out, here's how we handle disputes, helps to prevent relationships from being destroyed. In other words, everybody knows what the steps are, and if it's transparent, it's above board, here's how we deal with it, and if it is done early enough, it can keep things can be dealt with early before they become big issues. Having a process for people to express their grievances is a really good way to collect feedback and improve services. If there are lots of clients who seem to have issues with one particular practice, maybe that practice that you're doing needs to be reviewed. Maybe there's something there that they're telling you in the best way that they have, which might be filing a grievance, that says, we need to change that. And of course, because particularly if you're talking about clients or you're talking about other agencies who might be engaging in a grievance process, they didn't have a role often in creating the ways that you do work, and so a grievance process is a way of giving a voice, and we should all be about giving people voices and empowering them, and grievance processes can do that. So you see how happy all of that is? Not necessarily a bad thing to have a way of dealing with concerns right up front while they're small, above board, and make sure everyone feels listened to. More happy. It's simply a fact that conflict and disagreement are parts of healthy relationships. The desire to avoid conflict does not necessarily mean that a relationship is healthy. You have to be able to work through issues. You have to be willing to engage in really difficult conversations as part of a healthy relationship. So we can frame that too as one of the good parts of a grievance procedure. And for someone who, for example, one of our clients who was never allowed to have an opinion, was never allowed to say, no, I don't like that, or this thing, what you're doing is harmful to me. Being able to go through that process, even if they don't necessarily get the outcome that they wanted, but being able to go through that process and truly feeling heard and listened to and empowered to be able to take action can in and of itself be healing for that person. And so another reason why we should really encourage folks to make use of grievance processes when they have concerns. I would be lying if it was all happy, of course, so here's the unhappy part. Confidentiality in our programs can make this very difficult. And certainly for our clients, but also true for us. When you live in an environment of constant chaos and trauma, trust can become very difficult. Having the emotional energy and resilience to engage in conflict can be really hard because there's so many other things that you want to reserve that energy for. And so if you can just let something slip, then you let it slip when you shouldn't necessarily, so that things do build and get big, big, big. And the other thing is that conflict in and of itself is often really symbolic, and it's not necessarily about where the coffee pot should go in the office. It's actually about who has power in the office. And unless we acknowledge some of the symbolic parts of conflict, we'll never actually get them resolved. Because, again, often they are about power differences, whether it is a client who's got a grievance with a program or whether it is another agency who has a grievance with your program, with ICODVA, you name it. Often it comes down to power. There are several different kinds of conflicts, and I've kind of brought this up already. I mean, conflicts really usually arise from people having different values, people having different needs, people having different information, or people having different motivations. And those really can often just be simple conflicts. A lot of mind reading often goes into conflicts. Oh, I just thought because you did this, that, or the other, that this is why you did it, or this is what you were thinking or feeling. And those are simple conflicts. They can usually be cleared up with people simply stating all of those things. Here's what I knew. Here was my motivation. Here's why I believed it was good. Here's what I needed. And just clearing the air, as it were. So those are simple conflicts. Symbolic conflicts, I've brought it before, where it's really not about whatever the issue is that's being spoken. It's about something deeper. And again, it might be, I feel like you don't respect me, or I feel like I don't have power here, or I feel, you name it. And then there are, to me, those are the simple and the symbolic seem to be the most common ones. The least common are disputes that are truly in bad faith. That would be somebody who really is simply trying to cause trouble. Believe it or not, those actually are not very common. What I always say in terms of script writing is when you have the evil bad guy who's doing stuff just to be evil, that's really bad, cheap writing, because that's not how people behave. Even Hitler thought that he was doing good. But I'm not going to say that disputes in bad faith do not occur. Some people truly are trying to just cause trouble for whatever reason. Another thing I want to bring up is the issue of sunshine and shadow powers. That is, the very same skill that you have, or the very same strength that a program might have, can be both an agent of good, can provide sunshine. You know, if one of your talents is that you're just very charismatic and people are drawn to you, that's a great strength. You can charm people. You can get people to do what you want with enthusiasm, with your confidence. However, there's a shadow side to any sunshine, any strength. In the charisma example, it would be your ability to persuade others, seduce others into perhaps doing things they wouldn't go along with otherwise. For myself, I have extremely good verbal and written communication skills, which is great when I'm trying to teach somebody, when I'm trying to get to know somebody. I'm a really good listener. When I'm arguing and in conflict with somebody, however, I have some really powerful tools to just mow them over because of my verbal skills. Here's my ounce of prevention in terms of conflict. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So as far as preventing simple conflicts from becoming large-scale grievances, active listening, very key. And it's hard when you are worn out and defensive when you're worn out and you're exhausted and you've been doing far too much stuff to not be defensive because you are doing your best. But sometimes asking, tell me how you came to the conclusion, or tell me what you saw, or all of those things is actually your key. Just being sitting back and rather than responding, collecting more information and listening. Being open to feedback from clients, from peers. I will say for myself, I'm one of those people that when you come and you give me feedback that I do not want to hear, my instant response is my back gets up, I get defensive, I get angry. I may not show it and express it at the time. And I'm one of those people that then has to go home and think about it and sleep on it, and will usually come back within the next day or two and say, okay, actually there's probably some truth in what you said. My immediate response is to have defensiveness. So knowing that about myself, my best way of being open to feedback is to keep my mouth shut initially and go sleep on it. Being very clear about what you're trying to accomplish is important, so no hidden agendas within your policies and practices. Again, the way you approach conflict is as important as anything else. And transparency. Here's how we came to this decision. Here's what, here is our policy manual. Here is this manual. Here is, here is what guides us. Can be very important too. Here's how that decision was reached. Here's the problem. For the work that we're all engaged in, there's this balance between confidentiality and wanting people to perceive us as keeping their confidentiality, and also perhaps being challenged by clients who say, well, how come you did X, Y, and Z for this other person, but you won't do it for me? Or how come you treated her in this way, you did A and B, but when this one over here said it, you wouldn't help her. So it's really a balancing act there, and I think what transparency means here is being clear that we don't treat everybody the same. That's just a fact, and being clear about it. We don't treat everybody the same. What we do is we treat everybody according to their needs and what their goals are, according to the resources that we have. And that means it isn't going to be identical. The piece I just said, we're going to treat everybody the same in that we are going to treat everybody according to our resources, according to their needs and their goals. That remains the same, but what that actually looks like can be very, very different. So I think we have to be clear about that. And the other piece we have to be clear about is, and I'm not going to share with you, client, what our decision making was for so-and-so because you want me to maintain your confidentiality. That's why I'm going to maintain that person's confidentiality, and being clear about that. That's definitely a tightrope that I think can easily lead itself to unintentional conflict and grievances. So I'm going to start working up here on what grievance processes look like and what the standards require. It is a desire to implement the standards that, as I said, we had redone those last spring, but I want to make sure over this whole year that people really do know what some of those revisions were. Um, so at the project level, hopefully there is a good grievance process has different levels. So first I might deal with somebody in this rapid, informal way, one-on-one. I'm just going to talk to that advocate. I'm going to talk to my coworker. Maybe that didn't get anywhere, so we need to bring somebody else in. Maybe we're going to have our supervisor come in and try and mediate between us, or maybe we're going to deal with this at a staff meeting, or maybe if the clients have like a shelter meeting and every Thursday evening or something, it's going to be dealt with there. We need to have a few more people to try and air it. That's great to be able to have different levels because that's quick, it's informal, and it deals with things while they are still simple and before they become compounded by other issues. So you have that level, and then the next, if that doesn't deal with things, then it goes up. Maybe then something more formal, a formal meeting with a supervisor, taking it to the committee of your board or then the full board. Most of your agencies have such a grievance process in place. Almost every nonprofit agency has such a process in place, and they're written that way for a reason. Again, deal with the concern as quickly as possible, and if that doesn't work, then what other recourse can people have? And when we talk about what people usually want as the result of a grievance process, it's pretty simple. They almost always want some kind of acknowledgement and some kind of an apology. Even if that apology is, I'm sorry, not I would change what I did, next time, but I'm sorry that I didn't acknowledge how my decision hurt you. Or I'm sorry that I didn't make clear the reasons why we made that decision or we took that action. They usually want just some kind of either verbal or written or public or even private acknowledgement and apology. And that actually takes care of a lot of grievances. Other things people will sometimes want is they want training to be addressed. Obviously, if this program or if this person had known more about restraining orders, had known more about sexual harassment in the workplace, had known more, then maybe this wouldn't happen. Or as a way to prevent it from happening again, take some steps. So that's another thing. Sometimes people want a change in policy or practice, either a change or actually are implementing new ones. What I want is I want an apology. I want all of your staff to have training on sexual harassment, and I want a sexual harassment statement to be explicitly there in your human resources manual. If somebody has lost a position, lost a job, was refused services, they might want reinstatement. In other words, to be back doing what they were doing within that agency. Or they might want somebody to be removed from being their advocate or being removed from their position. Obviously, I'm kind of working up here in terms of harshness, if you will, or radicalness of changing things. Removal of funds. So you might have a funder say, well, you broke our contract, you weren't doing things in the ways that we require, and so we are reducing or cutting off your funds. In extreme cases, having sex with clients, for example, you might be looking at criminal charges being filed. Okay, so I'm going to move to talking about our shiny new standards and see where they take us. And I hope that my beautiful animated GIF is going out there to everybody because I was really happy when I found it. I mean, after all, I have to do something to lighten up a thing on grievances. Okay, the standards actually are not very dense in this case, and nothing surprising here. It looks great. Super. Thank you for letting me know that. That just means I'll be throwing more animated ones in the future. Because I thought, oh, is that going to look all choppy? So, standard 291, programs shall have a written internal grievance procedure for clients and shall notify clients of this procedure. And actually, there's a sample that's in the back as an appendix in the standards. I didn't include it in this PowerPoint. because it would have been very long and a lot of reading. But that basically says you got to have one. Okay, next. Standard 292, clients receiving services from member programs shall be informed that there is an ICODVA grievance procedure and a copy shall be made available to them upon request. So if you have a situation going on and somebody is looking for another venue for their concern to be heard, there is an ICODVA procedure itself. And so sometimes it doesn't hurt to have things heard by a third party outside of your agency. So let folks know that that exists, and I'm going to cover that in a minute. Standard 293, services to an individual shall not be terminated based on the filing of a grievance. That's probably a no-brainer. Though being able to continue providing them with services while there is a grievance hanging there with your supervisor or with your board or with one of the coalitions can be tricky. I'll acknowledge that for sure. Services may be transferred to another advocate or program if the grievance interferes with the advocacy relationship in such a way as to prevent its effectiveness. And then that's it actually for standards. And then there's a little bit of discussion around best practice. Basically says make sure that there are ways that people know that you have a procedure in various different ways, so that maybe they're told about it, maybe there's a sign hanging in the kitchen, kind of various ways that they might find out about it. Handle grievances in a timely manner. And if somebody does file a grievance, there shouldn't be retaliation against them. And those are typically called whistleblower policies. So if I, file a grievance about the program I'm working for, I'm protected from being fired, that kind of thing. That's actually it for what our standards say. Since I brought it up, let's talk about what happens if somebody does file a grievance with the coalition. And essentially, we have different tools for different situations. In other words, a grievance can be handled at an advocate level in terms of that particular person's certification, or it can be handled at a program level. So you pick the right tool. In terms of at the advocate level, quite frankly, we don't get a whole lot of these because that is typically a local program personnel issue, and that's not really ICODVA's area. So chances are, if that's what's going on, the person who might be calling or talking to one of the staff here or one of our committee members about it would probably be referred back pretty quickly to deal with it through whatever grievance process is there within that local program, as far as a human resources committee of the board or you name it. But let's talk about certification. You can lose your certification in two ways. You might lose it because you didn't renew or didn't complete an application, or somebody specifically files a grievance for a violation of that code of ethics. So the complaint process, let's say I get a phone call from a client who says, my advocate violated my confidentiality. They would need to put that in writing. And yes, that is a specific violation of the code of ethics, so they would need to put that in writing, and it goes to the certification committee. That advocate is then given the opportunity to respond and to provide, to come and meet with the committee and talk about what happened, why they did what they did or did not do what is being alleged. The complainant is also able to come and provide testimony and give their perspective. That advocate's supervisor is notified that there has been a complaint by that certification committee. And at this point, I am largely speaking hypothetically, because this process has been in place since we began the certification program, 10 years ago now? Maybe even more than that now. But I can't think of a time that it's been used, that it's gone all the way through. Nevertheless, it does exist. The advocate may be given the chance to use a corrective action plan. In other words, the certification committee hears this and says, okay, do we just pull this person's certification? Do we offer them some additional training on confidentiality? What would be, how can we correct this so that this person can do good work? And again, with our confidentiality example, maybe they have to take another training on confidentiality. Maybe they have to then write up some kind of statement about what they've learned about confidentiality, etc. The plan usually includes a timeline, so within 2 months, within whatever, you will have completed this. And then that person is going to, in the future, when they have any, they're going to show that they're going to consult with their supervisor, with whomever, for the, once a week for the next month, something, so that there's some kind of monitoring. Then the committee will let that original person who filed that complaint know that they've come to a final decision and that the process has been concluded. Boom. We have an agreement with both coalitions, actually, the Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the Iowa Organization for Victim Assistance, and ICODVA. We have kind of a mutual three-way agreement that if certification is pulled by one program for an ethical violation, that the other coalitions will withdraw certification for that person as well. So if ICODVA has somebody who was having sex with a client and we pulled their certification, we just want to know that they can't then go forward and say, hey, I'm certified by these other agencies, and essentially get cover under that. And it also means that the person who might have complained about it doesn't have to go through a grievance process with each particular entity that person might be certified under. So it's this mutual agreement. There is an appeals process, and the original complainant, or the advocate are both able to do the appeals. If they don't like the decision of that certification committee, they can, again, write. Everything has to be in writing so that there is some kind of a trail to the chair of ICODVA within 10 business days of being notified of that decision. So let's say the certification program, the committee decided that training would be enough, and this advocate that violated confidentiality did not need to lose their certification. The client disagreed. They could go to the chair and say, hey, I don't want this person to be advocating anymore. The executive committee for ICODVA reviews the appeal, and again, they can have a process where they bring all those parties. Certification committee, tell us how you came to your decision, why you came to your decision, the advocate, the complainant, the program, or maybe the program sends somebody to represent them. Everybody can come and get it on the table and talk during this appeals process, but then the decision of the executive committee is final. So that's kind of the last stop for that process. And not seeing any hands or comments, I'm going to assume that's clear as mud. The next process is at the programmatic level, and it's very much mirrors the first one. So first of all, somebody calls in and says, hey, I've got a problem with the way this program does X, Y, or Z. Or they talk to somebody who's on our board, or whoever. The complaint comes to ICODVA. The first thing that I as a staff person do is to say, well, first of all, you have to be willing to put it in writing, and second of all, it has to be a violation of our standards. So somebody can call and say they don't like what somebody's doing, but unless it's a violation of standards, there really isn't a process here for dealing with that particular grievance. And so once again, I would say, have you gone through the process at the local program? Have you gone and talked to that program's board? There really has to be something that, at least on the surface, is a violation of our written standards. what I would do is make sure that person had a copy of standards. I might help to point them in the right direction about which standard. This is the section that deals with confidentiality. This is the section that deals with your rights as a client. This is the section that deals with termination as a client, you name it, whatever. I might point them in the right direction, but then they need to put in writing what happened and which standards they feel are being violated. That's sent to the accreditation committee for review. And then a couple things. First of all, if they look at it and they say, you know what, it's not really a violation of our standards, that can be the end of it. Boom. They'll let that person, the complainant, know. There's nothing here for us to act on. We're not going to go forward. Or again, they might refer that person back to the local agency's grievance procedure, their board, deal with it at that level. They may say, you know, there really isn't anything here, but they may write a letter to the program, basically, hey, that's not cool. It wasn't a violation of our standards, but hey, that's not really cool. You might want to rethink that policy or that advocate or whatever else. And again, it's not their role to get into personnel matters. There's no authority there. If it's a local HR issue, it has to be a standard violation before the accreditation committee really has grounds for acting. So let's say that they believe that it may in fact be a violation of standards, what is alleged. So then the chair mails a copy of the written complaint to the program involved so that they know that they're essentially opening an inquiry, if you will. That sounds pretty, an inquiry sounds very scary, but that they're opening the question and they are going to look at it and take it up. The committee has 90 days, roughly 3 months, to review the complaint and submit concerns in writing to the program director of that particular agency. So this is beyond the, hey, it's not a violation of standards, but it's just not cool. This is a, hey, this could easily be a violation of standards, and here's why it would concern us. Maybe you need to take a look at what you're doing here. Maybe it's not such a smart move, you know, like wrapping babies in cellophane. By the way, if you should, as an aside, if you should look, there are hundreds and hundreds of advertisements wrapping babies in cellophane. The program has 39 days. I don't know why it's 39. Has 39 days to review that concern that they got in writing, and they are to respond in writing. They can provide additional information, as in, well, that's actually not what really happened, or, well, actually, here is our policy, and it looks quite different than what you're hearing. They can, at that point, provide a corrective action plan, if you will. This is what, you know, hey, when that person made us aware of it, at the same time they made you aware of it, we looked at it too, and we're already in the process of changing this. Here's our new policy, or here's our change in our training, or whatever else, or we're going to, and here's our timeline. So after having the chance to look into it more, the committee may say, you know what, if this had actually happened, it would have been a violation, but it doesn't seem like what we're hearing is really what happened, so unfounded. Or, again, because it may have taken time to get this far, maybe the program's already taken steps to resolve it, and it's like, you know what, but we don't really have anything to stand on. Once they became aware of it, they dealt with it, great. So then they send a letter to the program saying, your membership is in good standing, thanks for resolving this, have a good life. Or, actually, yeah, we're still concerned, and this did really happen, and we're not satisfied that you've taken steps to fix it, and we're worried about what's going to happen in the future. That's a different letter that's sent to that program executive director and that program's board of directors, which is the first time that program's board would be brought in, with a notice that that there will be another meeting to sit down and create some kind of a plan. So everybody gets together at the happy meeting, the happy review meeting, and probably not on the beach with beer, but maybe some food, maybe some tea. And the committee presents a plan of what that program needs to do to maintain ICODVA membership. Those things are probably going to look like the redress and repair slide I had up there before. Training issues, changing in policy and practice, reinstatement, removal, you name it, with a timeline. The program, again, can present additional information, and the plan that is determined will be sent to the ICODVA Board of Directors so that they are at this point made aware that there has been this complaint against a program that is a member, that it's been founded, that this plan is in the works to correct it. Because if that plan is not followed through on, if the carrots and sticks don't work, there is a very good chance that that program could lose membership. If they don't correct it within the timeline or they do not act on those steps at all, the committee sends a letter of noncompliance to the Board Advisory Committee and may recommend that that program be terminated from membership. I said that I had not seen the advocate process go through, but I have seen this one go through a number of times in the course of the last 17 years at ICODVA. Usually it does not get to the termination, though there have been a couple times that it has. Again, there is an appeals process, and that is the program can appeal to the ICODVA board chair. The ICODVA board will meet at their next regularly scheduled meeting. They don't hold a special meeting for this. They'll hear the appeal. As long as that process is going on, the program is still considered to be in good standing. At the end of that, the board decides, and that decision is final. And they have 30 days to let the program know of their decision. Funders may have an entirely different process depending on which funder you're talking about. It will look similar. It will be graded like that. It'll be a process of putting it in writing again so there is a trail, and appeals to boards. All of your funders are going to have some kind of board that they are responsible to. They're going to look for violations, maybe not of their standards, but of certified assurances, violations of contracts. In the case of CVAD, they can look for violations of ICODVA standards, because that's one of the agreements, is that programs that receive funding from them will follow ICODVA standards. They may make a site visit to, as part of this process, to gather information about a complaint that has been lodged. They will provide a corrective action plan with a timeline. You need to do these things to be in good standing with your contract and with us. So it's a very similar process, but it is, because it can vary depending on whether you're talking United Way or whether you're talking, who knows who your funder is. That's about as detailed as I'm going to get about them. And that right there is our nifty overview of grievance policies and practice and what ICODVA requires and what ICODVA's process and role is in all of that. And I'm going to pause there in case there's any comments or questions. And then I'm going to thank you for joining me on this lovely, snowy, for some people very, very snowy Tuesday afternoon. I will spare you the long story about how it took almost an hour for me to get out of my garage this morning because it was frozen shut. And hope that you all have a good afternoon. Mine certainly has been much better since I escaped my garage. Okay, well, we'll see you at the next one.